variety of selections. So without any further ado, we're going to get started with our afternoon presentation. I would like to introduce Rivian, Lewin, and Samuel Acuff. Both fellow graduate students here at the university, and they work in the Psychological Services Center. So they're going to talk a little bit about mindful approach to dissertation, stress, along with just all the various strategies you can use and various services that are available to you as students here that you can have and help you through this process. And the floor is yours.
Yeah, as he said, I'm Sam, this is Rivian, and we are doctoral clinical psych students here in the psychology building, and we see clients in the Psychological Services Center as well. So we're really excited to be here. We wanted to thank the graduate school for putting all of this together, but then also for prioritizing student mental health enough to invite us to come and speak here.
Okay, so before we get started, we'd just like to go over our plan for the day. So to begin, we're going to give kind of an overview of mental health among graduate students, what we already know about this experience of being a graduate student and the effect that it might have on one's mental health. We're then going to talk specifically about the process of writing a dissertation. So what that experience has been like for you all, common experiences that people hold in this big milestone. And then we're going to move into strategies for coping with stress. So we'll talk first about some immediate strategies for coping with stress, things that you can do kind of right away in the moment that might decrease your stress. And then we'll look to strategies that are more for promoting long-term patterns of change. Lastly, we'll kind of loop back to talking about mental health among graduate students, but from a more personal perspective. And we'll look at you all and be able to provide some individualized feedback about how it is your stress or your sadness or your worry might compare to your peers. And then we'll go ahead and close with giving you some resources and some future directions to take.
Right, so I just passed out a few measures. These are just brief measures of different mental health concerns. And then on the back, there's a measure, it's on the back, of just sort of how satisfied you are with your life. So throughout the presentation, if you have a moment to fill this out, we're going to circle back to it, and you'll just get a sense for maybe where you fall on some of the things that we'll discuss today. We're going to go ahead and jump in. As all of you know, graduate school is very challenging. And if you are here to work on a milestone of some sort, either your thesis or a dissertation, then you've been around for a while, and you know how stressful it can be. Often when you get to graduate school, you're in many roles. You might have come to be a student or to learn how to be a researcher or something like that, but often you're also maybe a teacher or a mentor for undergraduates or a professional out in the community. And at first, when you first start, you often have little training. You're kind of just thrown into it, and you kind of learn as you go. When you graduate, you might be doing one or two of these positions, but during graduate school, you're often doing like 4 or 5, 6 positions. So there's a lot going on all at once, and often you're being evaluated in each of these different areas as well. So that can be very stressful. And I don't know about you all, but we have both moved really far from home. Moved across the country to pursue our graduate education. And so many of you might also be sort of away from some of the social support that you grew up with or had in undergrad, which helps you get through hard times, more or less. And at the same time, you might be looking at those people, your undergrad friends, who chose different careers that didn't require so much education, and you might be asking some what ifs, like what if I would have gone into a career where I was just making a lot of money right when I finished, or where I didn't have to go to work and then go to another sort of form of work and then come home and work some more. So that's kind of what graduate school can be like. On top of all of that, we are often taking out student loans and often living off of relatively small amount of money and in some cases poor living conditions and with little access to healthcare and some needs that we have. So all of this to say, graduate school is the isolation, the evaluation, the responsibilities, the lack of support. This is sort of a pressure cooker environment for problematic, for having stress, or for feeling sad, or feeling bad in general. And in fact, this is the case. This has been reflected in research showing that graduate students report 6 times higher rates of depression and anxiety than the general population. And as far as I've seen in the literature, that's among the highest rates of depression in any population that is studied frequently. So.
What are some reactions to that? Is that surprising, or does that kind of fit?
Shocking but not surprising.
Yeah.
Shocking but not surprising.
Right. And many of us, including the other people in the room who are not currently in graduate school, have been through graduate school. And so we know that it is pretty high stress, and there's a lot of demands. And so all that to say, it's very likely that, according to this, 40% of us in this room right now are experiencing problematic clinical levels of depression or anxiety, maybe suicidal thoughts as well. And that is normal. There's nothing wrong with you. The environment that graduate school creates, it creates stress, and it makes you feel this way at times. And even if it's manageable, the things pulling you in different directions, your friends, family, graduate school, the work, the evaluation, when you sit down to work on your dissertation, it likely causes some interference, kind of gets in the way a little bit.
Right, so as Sam said, these kind of competing things that are important to us, like family, finances, work, they can really contribute to this experience of stress or sadness when we're trying to do something like writing a dissertation. So let's kind of take a micro look at this experience of writing. So you sit down to write your dissertation, you're in front of your computer, you've probably done this many times before, so it's probably a familiar spot for you. And as you sit there and you kind of try to get the words out, you might notice some thoughts come into your mind that sort of look like this. You might see your to-do list in your head, you might be replaying the words of your mentor, sort of shouting at you, saying this should have been done by X day, or I wanted to see this in this way. You might imagine that you're behind. You might be comparing yourself to other people in your cohort or your department. On top of all of that, you're imagining every single thing that must get done for you to graduate, which is something that we all really would like to do at some point. So in this experience of sitting down, writing your dissertation, and kind of the flooding of all of these thoughts, things can kind of really just take over you. So you start to feel like you're making no progress, you've been staring at the screen, you've barely written any words, your thoughts are kind of really at the forefront of this experience rather than progress about writing, and you're really feeling badly about yourself. Your head is starting to hurt, your heart might be racing because you're feeling anxious, and you're really feeling like you're running on low battery, like you kind of have no more resources to give to this project, and yet you've been sitting there for 2 hours. So you just really wish something else was done, right? And while all of this is happening, the rest of your life is looking really appealing right now. So you might be imagining what it might be like to have time to spend with your friends, to be able to be in a job already and make money, like so many people who are probably around our age. You might be wishing that you had started a family sooner. So this process is really, really common. And what happens is when we sit down to write our dissertation, this kind of cascade of thoughts that takes place, and then the emotions that come with feeling all these things, it's incredibly aversive, right? So every time we sit down, we kind of might associate it with this feeling of being incompetent, or not moving as quickly as everyone else, or feeling stuck. And with very good reason, that's super unenjoyable, and we'd like to kind of get out of that, right? So what do? We try to cope. And there's a lot of reasons why we might do all of these things, but let's just go over some of the ways we might cope. Before I start, how do you all cope? Does this happen to anybody in here? Okay. Yeah, so I'm seeing some nods. So how do you all cope? What do you do?
Work out.
Work out, okay. What else? Procrastinate.
How do you procrastinate?
Netflix.
Me too.
Wine.
Wine. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Clean.
Clean.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're all already kind of experts on this experience, and you've already touched on a lot of the things that we're going to talk about. So how do we cope? We want to put our minds to anything else, right? This is so aversive. It's anxiety-provoking. It's uncomfortable. It's distressing. It's depressing sometimes as well. So we might pull out our phone. We might contact a friend. We might scroll through social media. Does anyone do that when they're sitting at their desk? Okay. We might do some other things like cleaning. So we're still kind of like, okay, I want to do something that I need to do, but I don't want to do the dissertation, right? So we might want to do something like watch Netflix, watch a movie with friends, play an instrument, do one of our hobbies. And then we might really want to feel good quickly. And a quick way to do that is to put some stuff inside of us, like wine, beer, or food that tastes good. That's very, very common, right? And normal. And if you think about it in terms of just kind of logically, it makes a lot of sense when you're facing something that's uncomfortable and distressing to look for ways to feel less uncomfortable, right? So the question is, how do these strategies work? So everyone in this room is bright and intelligent. We all kind of have to be, to some extent, to get to this point. So you're not doing anything that you're doing for no reason. There are pros to all of these strategies. What are some of the pros to some of these?
Well, I mean, if you're exercising, that's good for you.
Right, to be good for your health, exercising. What about texting a friend? What are some of the pros of texting a friend?
Emotional health, connection with the world.
Yeah, connection with the world, feeling supported. What else?
Decompress.
Decompress, yeah. So your mind's probably running a mile a minute, giving yourself a breather, right? Yeah.
I focus better in a clean house.
Okay,
I
you can
clean
focus
first.
better when the house is clean. Right, right. So absolutely, all of these things are not without their benefit. And sometimes the benefit is sort of immediate, just making it so that the stress that we're feeling in this moment, we can kind of put our focus into something else, something that can allow us to feel confident. Like we all probably feel like we can clean the house, maybe better than we can write a dissertation. So there's of course benefits. What are some of the drawbacks to some of these strategies?
So she gets back. You're not really get productive in the dissertation per se.
Right, right. So feeling like, although this might feel better in the moment, that dissertation's still there and you haven't made progress on it yet.
It ends up creating more anxiety.
Creates more anxiety. Tell me about that.
Well, if you find too many, like, oh, I'm just gonna do this for an hour, and then I'll get back to work, for 4 hours. Then the night's over, and oh, I didn't do it.
Right, absolutely.
A lot of times when we get involved in these types of situations, we think, oh, I have this much more time to complete it. So we think that we have more time than we actually do.
Okay.
Go outside.
Yeah, so time and how that all works with these extra things, right. Other thoughts? Okay, those were all really helpful. So yeah, there's benefits to these things and there's drawbacks. Certainly we can feel more connected, we can have a boost in our mood. It just feels better to feel good and maybe it's easier to write when you feel good. We can also maybe drink a little bit too much and then that can make us feel sick the next day and then there goes another day of writing, right? So there's lots of different ways that this can play out.
Right, and you know, we've all used some of these in various degrees to cope. And we don't mean to judge any of these. Like we just said, there are good things, there are bad things about these strategies, all these different strategies. And for some people, some of them work, and for others, they don't, right? There's just a lot of ways to deal with stress. And some of them are momentary, some of them are longer term, some of them are maybe help you get you closer to your dissertation, some of them don't. But all of that is not true for each individual. It's different across people. And so if the methods that you're using to cope right now are working, then you should continue to use them. If they're not, we're here to discuss some alternatives. the first thing we want to touch on before we really get to coping alternatives is to talk about how we ended up here in the first place. So, you know, some of you are 3, 4, 5 years into graduate school, and graduate school is milestones. Graduate school is completing coursework. It is whittling down your to-do list, maybe publishing for some of them. We operate on this I need to complete this task kind of mindset. And that helps us in a lot of ways, right? That helps us get things done. So I need to obtain my degree, I need to publish academic work, and then I need all of that so that I can get a job when I get out of school. But many of you 5 or 6 years ago came into graduate school because you wanted to be a certain type of person, because you wanted to contribute to something in some way. You maybe wanted to be the type of person who works diligently, contributes to a certain field, helps people. I know we all come in with different values, different reasons for pursuing our degrees, and they're probably different across different fields as well. But that often gets sort of lost in the weeds of graduate school. And when we sit down to work on our dissertation, we're thinking more often about what I need to complete rather than why we are doing this in the first place. And I think that focusing in on that can help us sort of understand, okay, gives us a little motivation to push forward.
So if we could even right now, if you all can just take a moment and try to access these values. So who is it that you all want to be in this room? What are the values behind your pursuit of this degree? And I'd love if anyone would share. A full-time academic professor?
After 10 years, I was like, okay, I'm tired of this shit, so.
Okay, and if you were to have that, what type of person might you be? Okay, so you want to be someone who's happy. What about it would make you happy?
Because my check is more.
That's fair. You want to be someone who's secure in their finances, right? Right, that matters. What else? What are other things people want to be?
I want to be a teacher.
Wanting to be a teacher? And if you were a teacher, you would be someone who what? What type of person is that?
Inspires my students.
Yeah.
Be inspirational.
Inspires learners, inspires others, right?
Right. And so could you imagine if you wanted to go in because you wanted to inspire people or because you wanted to help people learn. When you're sitting down to work on your dissertation, to access those rather than to think, man, I have to get this done. Do you see how that might just put you in a better headspace to start with? So that's where we'll start. Now we'll sort of move into some of the coping strategies, and we're going to, as Rivian mentioned, we're going to do some sort of strategies you can use in the moment when you're sitting at your computer trying to write your dissertation, and then we'll move into some strategies that are longer term sort of patterns. So one of these ways to cope in the moment is deep breathing. So anxiety and stress, part of what those are physiological responses to a threat. And oftentimes when our ancestors were out in the wilderness, this saved our lives, right? But when you're sitting at your computer working on your dissertation, it's not as helpful, right? It's still there, you're still very stressed, but it's not going to be helpful for you to maybe write the next sentence. So what the physiological response is rapid heart rate, sort of heavy, quick breathing, sweating, muscle tension. These are what you might experience if you were, having some type of anxiety response. And one way to counteract that is to affect your physiology in some way. And so we can do this through deep breathing. We're actually going to do this as a group right now. So this is a tool, like if you type in breathing exercise into Google, this little blue box will pop up and it just leads you through a 1-minute breathing exercise. There are a lot of other tools out there, but we're just going to start here. If everyone could look at the circle, bring awareness to your breath, and then breathe in. And try and breathe in for the duration, and then breathe out for the duration of the circle shrinking or expanding.
You might notice your mind has drifted to your to-do list. Just gently bring it back to the circle and to your breath.
So we don't take long enough in our individual days, I think, to just stop and breathe for a minute. I was noticing as I was doing that how long it felt, and it's crazy how we never stop and just breathe. So this is a 1-minute exercise. How did it affect you guys? What were your reactions to it? Calm. Dizzy. Makes you sleepy.
Yeah. It makes my chest stop hurting.
Oh, really?
Stop hurting. Yeah, I have a lot of chest pain when I'm anxious. Yeah, kind of loosens up your chest, right? Yeah. Other things people notice. Did anyone else feel like that was a really long minute?
Yep.
Was it a minute?
It was a whole
It was a
minute.
minute.
Wow.
And when you're writing, does it kind of feel like the minutes just disappear?
Yeah.
But then this minute for your breath feels
Yeah.
long.
You know, we've had people when we've talked, and I've felt this way myself, that they don't feel like they have time to do something like this. And honestly, as you're going through it, I can see why you might feel that way, because it does feel like sort of a lengthy amount of time. But if it can help your chest stop hurting, and if it can make you feel calm, then it might be worth a minute before you start to actually write the dissertation. When you sit down, in the morning or whatever. And I think it's really important that you brought up that it made you dizzy, and that it made you sleepy. Is that some of these strategies may be more or less effective for some of you out there. So we'll offer a handful, and hopefully some of them work for everyone. But it is the case that some of these might not be as effective. So.
Okay, so another way that we can really affect the stress that we feel inside our bodies by influencing what we do in the outside of our bodies is called progressive muscle relaxation. So how many of you, when you feel stressed, notice that there's like tension in your neck, in your back, sometimes the jaw? Yeah, so that happens to people a lot. Your body can become very tense. And this technique is a way of kind of focusing in really tightly on that tension. Oh, I'm sorry. And then releasing. And part of the resources we'll give you will have information about this, but essentially what happens is you make one part of your body really tense and tight, and then you slowly release it. And this can really change physiologically the experience of stress.
Have anyone used these, like a breathing exercise or deep muscle relaxation?
You said you did deep breathing with.
Right.
Right.
Right. It can help sort of create a rhythm. Yeah. Anyone else?
And of course, we know that physical exercise is a really, really helpful way to handle stress. And with physical exercise, we like to kind of make this more of a discussion. Because a lot of times people will set really high expectations for themselves about how frequently, how much, how long they're going to exercise. And sometimes those goals are kind of unreasonable for them, and so they don't exercise at all. And we know that physical exercise is really, really good for all different types of physiological components of stress, but we really want to just kind of highlight that we're not saying, so you should be working out every day for an hour. We're saying maybe in a moment of stress, you might want to get up and take a 5-minute walk. You might want to even just walk around your building. Think of ways to incorporate more physical activity where it's still doable. And as students, we all have memberships to the campus gym, where there are classes for us too as part of the membership. So something to keep in mind.
Now, we've been speaking about sort of physiological aspects of stress and anxiety up until this point, or ways that you can deal with it by changing your body, more or less. But I don't know about you all. A big part of my anxiety are these thoughts that come up for me about what my professor thinks of me, about what my colleagues think of me, about the quality of my work. These are all thoughts that come up for me regularly. And our mind is a really special thing. You could not complete your dissertation without your mind, right? You kind of need that. And it helps you structure your outline, helps you find resources, hold information long enough for you to get stuff out. At the same time, your mind is capable of taking a thought and making it feel as if it is reality. And I want to try something real quick. We're going to do a little exercise here. If everyone could close their eyes and imagine a chair. You're sitting in this chair. Imagine it's the most comfortable chair that you've ever sat in. It's kind of your dream chair. So take a moment to really picture what it's like from your perspective sitting in this chair. What's the material like? What's it feel like to the touch? What's like the firmness of the chair? Do you kind of sink in, or do you kind of sit on it flat and kind of hold you up?
Feel the chair against your back, on the back of your legs. Really feel it make contact with your body.
If everyone could open their eyes. We won't have time to go through everyone's chairs, but I wonder if you're like other people, if you're like myself, then there was a very specific chair that you could picture and feel, perhaps, even sitting in. And if you're like a lot of other people, you may have actually noticed a room that the chair was in. And I didn't say anything about a room. I didn't ask you to picture a room or to imagine the room. But for me, it's always for some reason, it's in a cabin, there's a fire, it's snowing outside. It's like the perfect scenario for me. And I never asked myself to imagine the weather, right? Did anyone experience something like that? Where it was very vivid?
Where were some of your places? Yeah.
Mine was actually, I mean, to the detail of how it was decorated, the purple blanket with it.
Right.
It was just, how do you say it? Ergonomically sound. Right? It was just everything. But also, too, I was done with my PhD, so that part.
So your mind took you to the time of your
A
life.
whole new scenario.
That part right there.
Yeah.
Anything else stand out for anyone?
For me, it was just my recliner and bed in my house. And I think for me, part of that is I really just want to be able to sit in my recliner and not think about this dissertation.
Right.
But I just want to be comfortable in my own home.
Right.
You know.
I was torn between a chair I had sat in before and one that I want to purchase. Totally two different materials though, so I was back and forth.
You're kind of back and
between the
forth.
two.
Right.
I don't know why.
Well, in this whole time, we're all sitting in this room. The lighting's not great, you know, it's a little bright. Surrounded by other people. And actually, these chairs are pretty comfortable. Usually when we do this, people are sitting in wildly uncomfortable chairs. But these chairs look pretty good. But the point is your mind was able to create this whole scenario that's not consistent with your current reality. And this was a silly exercise about a chair, but it does this with every single thing that comes into your mind every day. The evaluations you have about yourself, when you think about your professor's evaluation of you, you think about it as if it were happening actively in that moment, right? And so we want to advocate for noticing the role of your mind in your life, the way your mind operates separate from reality, although we often see them as overlapping. And so,
Did you have a question?
Well, not a question, but I did this when I was trying to get myself prepared for the defense. And I placed myself there, so I knew what room I was going to be presenting in, and I placed it there, imagined where everybody would be sitting, and go figure if they didn't sit exactly where I thought they would sit. And I imagined who would ask questions, what types of questions, and so when I was there, it's almost kind of like, oh, easy breezy. And so I think that I may try that again for the actual full dissertation defense and just see what might happen, although there may be a couple more audience members this go around.
right. And your mind was able to create that situation rather well.
Exactly.
You were able to picture everything and picture the situation.
And it actually kind of took some of the edge off
Right.
a little bit.
And I wonder, that's really helpful input, that maybe imagining it so vividly can take some of the edge off. I I wonder if some of you can imagine that imagining it so vividly would add a lot of edge. And the way that you might picture it going may actually be worse than how likely it's actually going to go.
Right.
So it really depends, right? That sounds like something really helpful for you. And I know if it were me and I imagined that defense, my mind would be harsh.
Oh, it was harsh in my mind, but by the time I got there, because I had made myself,
Right.
I was already de-stressed. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
I was expecting the worst, but better outcome came.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Well, we're going to walk through this flow chart here. So, and I'm going to ask Rivian, can you provide us with a thought that maybe you have related to your work in this way?
Okay, so like when I'm working on it?
Yeah, just imagine you're sitting there working on your dissertation and the thought comes up.
Okay, so the thought that usually comes up for me is that like this is impossible. This will never get done.
This will never get done. This will never get done. So the first step is to notice that a thought is occurring, right? When your mind says this will never get done, often it's the narrative of our life, right? And so it just is what the reality is. That's how it feels. The first step is to notice, oh wait, that was a thought. That was a part of my mind, right? The second step is to recognize it as just that, a thought separate from reality, which would be to label it as a thought. So you notice it, you notice, wow, that thought came up and it's affecting me. And then you say, my mind just told me that this is an impossible task, right? So you're kind of a little separated from, you're saying, my mind is important, it helps me out, it helps me write the dissertation, but also other things help me out in life, and I'm going to let my mind have sort of an input, but maybe not all the input. So my mind told me that this is impossible, it's not going to get done.
Can everyone kind of see the difference between those two things? So if I say, it is impossible that I will finish this, that's sort of a fact. I'm stating how it is things are going, it's a fact. But if I say, my mind is telling me this is impossible, I'm not really saying that it's true, I'm not really saying it's rooted in reality, I'm not really saying it's what's happening, I'm just saying it's what my mind's spewing out. These are the words that my mind came up with in this moment.
And once you've noticed that, the question that you should always ask yourself is, does believing in this thought, giving it weight, does it help me get closer to who I want to be? So we talked about values earlier. That's a lot of what we would be referring to. Does it help me be a contributor to my field? Does it help me work hard on my dissertation? So for you, what's the this is impossible?
So the this is impossible thought probably usually leads me to work very frantically. So I want to get a lot done really quickly, which maybe kind of tricks me into thinking this is good. This is like pushing me into action. But I think also it makes me very nervous. It makes my work lower quality because I'm stressed, and I probably feel little pleasure if any pleasure at all in what I'm doing when this thought comes up.
Right. So in this case, it may be not getting you closer to who you want to be.
Right.
Right. So the question here is, and this is different for everyone, but if it gets you closer to who you want to be, then allow it to influence your behavior. Believe the thought. Hold on to it. If it doesn't, we need to find ways to hold the thought more lightly. And we're going to do something kind of funny. So what we would typically do in this case would be to have everyone sort of tell us one of their most problematic thoughts, the things that burdens them. We're not going to do that. We're not going to go all around. I'm going to share one of mine that I imagine some of you may have had at one time or another. The thought of, I am inadequate. I'm not enough. Does anyone have that thought? Does it ever come up? Yeah? And for some of us, it might come up regularly. What we're going to do, we're in a library, so we didn't think about that, but we're all going to together, out loud, say I'm inadequate 50 times.
What?
Starting right now. Ready?
I'm
inadequate. I'm inadequate. I'm inadequate. I'm inadequate.
A little faster. I'm inadequate. 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 I'm inadequate.
I'm not gonna quit.
I'm hearing a lot of chuckles. I'm hearing a lot of chuckles right now, right?
I'm not gonna quit.
Now, I thought that was one of the thoughts that really bothered us, right? And we were all just laughing, saying I'm inadequate over and over again. It almost seems silly, right?
But the first time you said it, it probably stung a little bit. So what was it like the very first time you said those words all the way to the last where I don't even know what you all were saying. What happened?
Well, it's just silly. I mean, the overexposure sort of makes it
Right.
seem silly.
Yeah, so these words that our mind has evaluated to be cutting, negative, hurtful, if we say them enough times, the weight that our mind put on them is kind of a little shaky.
Yeah, they start to sound like the word doesn't even have meaning, you know. And these words are words that we've attributed value to in some way or another. And then when we say them in our mind, they're shortcuts for terrible feelings, right? But if we realize them as just a series of syllables, more or less, then maybe they can carry a little bit less weight and we can move forward, towards who we want to be rather than maybe where our thought would take us. We're going to give a resource sheet. We're going to have Michael send it out. And so there's going to be some more examples of stuff like this on that resource sheet.
So now we're going to kind of move into the second category of strategies, and these are more long-term ideas, long-term ways that we can cope with our experiences and our stress. So something really, really important, as we kind of have talked about a lot in graduate school, is setting goals. There's always something that needs to be done, and probably staying diligently on top of it feels imperative, right? But the way we set goals really matters, and we might feel like we never achieve our goals, and maybe that's because we don't, or maybe that's because we're setting goals that are not doable, not reasonable, and so we're kind of making ourselves feel like we're not successful when really it's about modifying the approach. So we like to use this framework. This is called the SMART Goals framework. S stands for specific, so what exactly will you accomplish? M stands for meaningful, which is this goal aligned with your values? Does this have meaning to you as a person? Adaptive, is the goal likely to improve your life in some way? Realistic, so do you have the resources you need to accomplish this goal? And if you don't, what are they? How will you get them? And is it time frame? By when will you complete this goal? So all of us in this room share at least one goal, which is completing our dissertation, right? That's a pretty lofty goal, so let's try to kind of break it down into this SMART goals framework. So let's say we want to complete a section of our dissertation. Does that feel a little bit more reasonable for everyone? Okay, so let's walk through the SMART goals framework. So starting with, I want to complete a section of my dissertation. We ask ourselves, is it specific? Is it specific enough? What do you guys think?
Nope.
No, right? There's so many sections of the dissertation, so we need to narrow it down. So let's say I want to write the measures section of my dissertation. So now we're specific. Is it meaningful? So I need to kind of contact my values. So these are real goals of mine, real values of mine. So I value being someone who contributes to my field, who communicates my ideas, and who is diligent. So for me, writing this measures section is pretty consistent with who I want to be. Is it adaptive? This goal will help me carry out my values, right? It allows me to be this person, so this is pretty adaptive for me. It will improve my life. Is it realistic? So this is a really important one. We might say, yeah, it's realistic. You have to write a measure section. Everyone has to write a measure section. It's realistic. But I stop and think, what is it that I need to write a measure section? Do I just sit down and write it? I don't know if anyone's ever written a measure section, but you need a lot of stuff. I need the original articles that have the measures. I need to calculate reliability of my sample. It's very technical, but there's a lot of steps, right? So at this point, I kind of pause and say, this really isn't realistic. I mean, for me to even be able to write a measure section, I need to do all these other things first. So I might make a new goal. Rather than write the measure section, I'm going to gather the materials that I need and then write one paragraph. That feels more realistic to me. And then I have to think about the time. So knowing I have class all day tomorrow, but some openings on Wednesday and Thursday, Friday evening seems like a good time for me. So we go all the way from I have to write a dissertation to I want to compile the items needed for my measure section and write the first paragraph by Friday at 5. It kind of narrows things down in a big way. Okay.
Another important sort of patterned activity is scheduling. Now this is probably not what your week looks like. You probably have work, you have classes, maybe you have family things that you need to do for your family. But for the sake of the example, just imagine this is what your week looks like. And so when we all know that we need to do some work, we need to work on the dissertation, we need to complete some kind of task, right? But when you don't have any time scheduled to do that, then at every moment, you might actually feel that you should be doing that right then and there. At the same time, you probably feel really like you don't want to work on it at all, right? So when this is going on, it's really hard for you to even get yourself to work, and then when you go to sleep at night, you're like, man, I didn't actually get anything done. So what we're advocating for is asking yourself a couple of questions. How much time per day should be allotted to this work? Right? Should I schedule an hour in the morning every morning? 2 hours? I don't know. Whatever is workable for you. But then at the same time, how much time per day should be allotted for leisure? Because so often we say, oh, I have to get this done. But you still have to be a human being, right? You still have to exist in the world and have friends and have family and enjoy yourself. So I would also advocate for scheduling leisure time as well. So now let's imagine we just schedule a 2.5-hour block on Monday morning, and this is what you're going to do every week, right? Now, what might happen when you go to sit down and start working on your dissertation on Monday morning? Emails, absolutely.
What else? Yeah.
Sometimes I just don't feel, good. Like I'm
Right.
either exhausted or just don't feel
Right.
up to task.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And often, I think partially that's because we say, I need to complete this dissertation, right? So this is the part where I know if I was sat down and I was going to start writing, then I would probably immediately pull out my phone and start looking through the news or something like that. But this is where SMART goals can be very helpful. They can help structure a couple hours of your time to say, okay, I'd like to get this smaller thing done. And I know to do that, I need to do these kind of other, minor tasks. And some of them are harder than others, right? And some of them are shorter or longer than others. So when you're scheduling time to work on your dissertation, and when you're scheduling leisure time, you can have sort of different activities that you can choose from that are easier or harder, shorter or longer, that will actually allow you to still get something done during your writing block. Maybe you didn't do the whole measure section, but you said, I need to do the first paragraph of the measure section, the SMART goal. I need to gather all my citations, essentially, and I need to calculate reliability coefficients. Well, maybe you really, really don't like the writing part, but gathering citations isn't that bad, right? You're still working towards something, and at the end of your writing time, you can sort of step away from your computer, be proud of what you accomplished, and then let it go for the day. Move on with your time and come back to it the next morning, the next writing time. Block writing time.
Yes.
I think I've gotten better at this, but a lot of times when I sit down to write, I'm getting ready to get ready.
Right. So you're kind of amping yourself up, but you're not really ready to write.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really good point. That's why this kind of scheduling and really thoughtful planning, you can plan for that. You can have your ready to get ready time, right? For 20 minutes, and then move on.
Right.
It's a really good point, though. Okay.
So we handed out the measures at the beginning, and now we're going to get back to that. I hope you all had an opportunity to fill them out. Now, for the first measure, it says SAD at the bottom, that is stress, anxiety, and depression. We're going to actually have to multiply that by 2, because these are based on the long form of this measure. So if you can multiply by 2, that's what your score is, and that's where you'll fall.
So go ahead and take some time if you haven't filled it out to just fill it out and then add up those totals.
like error, like confidence intervals or anything. This is more just like clinical cutoffs that have been calculated by comparing to other clinician interview scales. So that's another good point, that this is not like a clinical measure that says, yes, this is where you are, right? This is a rough measure, more or less. And, what it might indicate is that if you fall in a certain range, specifically moderate or below, that you might be struggling with clinically significant symptoms, and it might indicate that you could benefit from services. But there is some amount of error.
Is the SAD, is that an acronym for stress, anxiety, and depression, or are those columns the same as this?
Right, so the S is for stress. Sorry, we
The
should
order
have
is
switched
the
around.
third,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the S is stress, the A is anxiety, and the D is for depression.
Right.
Yeah. It is in the opposite order.
And we have to multiply by 2.
Right.
So add down.
We're not clear about this part.
Yeah, we should have
Sorry about that.
It's clear, it's just that I was like,
Right. You'd like to feel normal.
Dutch vibe.
Yeah. You have to vibe it. We're going to talk about reactions in just a second.
Right.
But I appreciate that sentence.
So we should double the distress anxiety and stress scale, not the
Not the satisfaction of life. Okay.
Okay. Does everyone kind of have their numbers? Need another minute? Okay, what are some reactions to this? We've already had one person say, I don't like this. I'd like to feel normal, right?
My first reaction is I leaned over and came in here and said, oh, well, last week they had been one thing, but then you talked to me the week before when I started my comprehensive exam, and it had totally different scores.
Right, right.
So
So depending on what's going on. Yeah, it fluctuates.
See, with me, it's kind of, I had a lot of zeros because Session 1, I really don't. I work, I live a very comfortable life. But then I had meds to help me.
Okay.
So a lot of these are zeros.
And it sounds like they're working.
Oh, yeah.
Great. Okay.
I'm actually really relieved to know that a lot of what I'm feeling is stress.
Okay.
I'm also medicated, so I'm like, thank God, this is of stress, and it's just my crazy brain. Like, that's where most of my wounds are, is in the stress problem.
Okay. And for you, that kind of feels like good.
Well, it makes it feel more like it's situational, and hopefully that when I'm done with this stupid query, that I'll feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe more situational improvement.
Right.
Well, we did this because sometimes, you're only feeling what you're feeling. Seeing some of these sort of cutoff sections, and then also knowing that, 40% of us theoretically are depressed or anxious or both, maybe can help you see, whether or not what you're going through is manageable or not. So we do have a resources sheet that we're going to be handing out to everyone for emailing. But, it might be that you could benefit from additional services, either on campus or off campus. There's a lot of different options. We've got some written out in the resources sheet. But I hope that if that's the case, you see that you're willing to at least talk to someone, a friend, family member, and possibly seek additional services as well. Because a lot of us are just going through a lot in graduate school.
And just one specific resource we'd just like to highlight is that we actually lead a therapy group specifically for graduate students. There was an email that went out last week from Dr. Beach. There'll be other emails that go out, and we'll be here to answer questions. Just something to keep in mind. So we do just want to highlight that it is really normal that everyone in this room is stressed. This is a really stressful experience. You're all here because there are certain things that are really, really important to you, and having something that matters so much lends itself to great pain, great stress, great worry. So first, we do just want to acknowledge that, and then we also want to point out that there are resources, there are ways that this stress can be alleviated in some way. And so if you might need them, we just hope that you seek them. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this. So I just wanted to add a few things. I know I talked about a little bit about my own experiences and how much it has influenced how I've organized this event. And when I started doing the prep work and trying to think about conceptualize, there was two things I knew I wanted to include in this event. One was providing childcare for everyone who may need it, because even though I myself don't have children, I've watched my friends go through dissertations while either having children, giving birth to children. I'm just like, y'all are amazing, and I want to help out as much as I can. The second thing I knew I wanted to include is this, because it's stressful, depending on how your own situation and everything, it might not be that bad, it can be terrible, but we all need to know that you're not alone in this. Like I said, that statistic is not surprising, but it's still shocking. And that there are resources on campus that, and these things can help you now and throughout your life. As I was telling both of you earlier, about a year ago, just because I was still dealing with my own anxiety, I sought out help from Psychological Services Center to deal with some of the anxiety that made my dissertation so much more stressful, and I should have sought help years ago for it. And still struggling, but I'm more aware, and some of these very same tools are the ones that I worked with the counselor that I was seeing. So please do avail yourself of those resources. I'll be emailing out the sheet that they send me as soon as I get it. And yeah, have a good afternoon, and we'll still be down here for writing assistance, research and citations and everything else. So hope you have a good rest of the afternoon. If I don't see you before you leave, the library does close at 5. You'll start hearing announcements around 4:30 about we're closing. But if I don't see you before you leave, I will hopefully see you tomorrow morning for our next session.